Let's start with a web panel with no grid. It's enough that there is some attribute in the form for Genexus to understand that it has to search for its value in the database. This, of course, applies to both web panels with and without grids. But what if there were no attributes in the form? Would this be enough for not establishing a base table? The answer is no. Genexus will look for attributes in the form, visible or hidden, and in all events. But in the events, it'll only take into account the attributes that are loose. That is to say, attributes that do not have a specific navigation context that explains them, as would be the case of attributes within a for each command, or within the calculation of an inline aggregation formula, for example, because the navigations for those attributes will be determined precisely by the for each command or by the formula, respectively. In this example, we have three programmed events. The first one we see is the load event, which, as we know, will be executed only once or n times, depending on whether or not Genexus finds a base table for the web panel. If we look at its programming, we have an attribute, trip_date, but it's in the context of an inline aggregation formula, so it does not participate in determining a base table for the panel, but only for the table to be run through by the formula. In fact, if the panel did not have a base table, what would happen is that the load event would be executed only once, and there, the formula, which would count all the trip's records, trip_date is a secondary attribute of the trip transaction. However, the situation of the other two events we see is different, because there are attributes appearing without any other context to explain them, except that it's assumed that there is a base table, and that is its context. They're not within inline formulas, neither within a for each command, nor any other structure that establishes a context for them. They will be attributes of the extended table of the web panel's base table. So, even if we had not specified any attribute in the form, by the mere presence of these attributes here, Genexus will already infer a base table, and of course, its extended table. Before continuing, let's remember that neither the attributes that may appear in the parm rule nor those that may be specified in the web panel conditions will participate. Therefore, it's not the appearance of this attraction ID that we see in the conditions that will make the panel have a base table. We'll see this better in a moment. Imagine, for example, that we made a save as of the previous panel because we wanted to transform it into one without a base table. Then we change in the form all the attributes to variables, which are the ones that now in the start event we must set as invisible or change their color, or put them in bold. Besides, since we precisely wanted to not have a base table, we should program a for each command in the load event, because if everything goes as we think, it'll be executed only once, and that's where we should load the variable values. In this case, we won't need to write a load command because we don't have to add lines to a grid. The variables will be loaded on the screen with the values they have at the time of loading. We have not specified a base transaction for the for each command, so Genexus extracts all its attributes and determines the minimum extended table that contains them all, which is the attraction table, and since we have a condition that includes an attribute from that table, then it applies it. Everything will work perfectly. In the load event, the for each command will retrieve a single record, that of the attraction ID attraction. The navigation list that we would expect for our web panel without a base table would be this one, where we see that inside the load event, the for each command is being specified for the attraction table. And note that it's being correctly filtered by attraction ID equal to the value of the variable received by parameter. Because it's the primary key of the table, the for each command will retrieve a single record, and because it's ordered by that attribute, it'll be the first and only one. That's why instead of saying for each, here it says for first. However, if we check the navigation in Genexus, it'll show this other report, in which it obviously found a base table. We see it clearly in the load event. It's the country table. Note that it'll run through the entire table and will run one load event per country. And for each one, it'll run the for each command. What will we see on the screen then? We won't notice the problem at runtime, because the assignments to the screen variables will only be executed when the load for the country of the attraction is being executed, as it's the only case in which the body of the for each will be executed. We've been lucky. However, we've incorrectly programmed our web panel. Why did it find a base table? Because we missed this attribute. What's it doing there when the country ID variable should be in its place? Precisely, when Genexus is going to determine the navigation of the web panel by finding this attribute without context within an event, it understands that it's then implicitly being told that there is a context, that of the web panel's base table. And since it's the only attribute in that situation, it's the only one that will be considered in this case to determine what that base table will be. That's why it selects the country table. Here we see the navigation list according to that programming. And we're going to correct that error. We'll replace the attribute with the variable country ID, and now we save. And let's see the new navigation list, which now is indicating what we expected. In other words, the load event has no base table, and within it, the attraction table is run through with the for each command. In summary, we managed to ensure that our web panel has no base table. We can see how it's true then that the attributes that appear in the conditions are not going to participate in the determination of a base table for the web panel, because otherwise, this attribute should have determined a base table, and it did not. Likewise, if instead of receiving in the variable, we receive in the attribute, note what happens with the navigation. It's still a navigation for a panel without a base table. The conditions, either implicit because they are received in attribute in the parm rule, or explicit because they're specified in the panel conditions, are taken into account to filter the data only after the table to be navigated, and the tables of the extended table to be accessed are determined. It's only there, if necessary, that these filters are applied.